A blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the New Mexico territory as Abigail Kingston crawled through the scorching desert sand, her trembling fingers clutching the bullet wound in her side. The year was 1878, and she had just learned the cruelest lesson a woman could. Never trust a man who values gold more than his wedding vows. The distant silhouette of her husband Thomas disappeared over the horizon hours ago, taking their wagon, supplies, and 7 years of marriage with him. His final words still rang in her ears. "I'm sorry, Abby, but that gold's my ticket to a better life. Can't have you slowing me down." The gunshot that followed wasn't meant to kill her, just ensure she couldn't follow. Abigail's throat burned with thirst as she dragged herself toward a lone Joshua tree. Blood seeped through her fingers and stained her once beautiful blue calico dress. The desert heat had grown merciless as the day progressed, and now, as evening approached, she knew the bitter cold of night would soon follow. She collapsed beneath the meager shade, her vision blurring at the edges. "Just rest a moment," she whispered to herself. "Just a moment." In the distance, a plume of dust rose from the desert floor. At first, Abigail thought it was another mirage she'd seen plenty as the day wore on, but the rhythmic pounding of hooves grew louder. A lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the dying light. Abigail tried to call out, but her parched throat produced only a raspy whisper. She fumbled for her handkerchief and waved it weakly above her head. The rider changed course, heading in her direction. As he drew closer, she could make out a tall man atop a chestnut quarter horse. His wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she caught the glint of concern in his eyes as he reined his horse to a stop. "Madam," his voice was deep, tinged with a southern drawl. "Good Lord." He dismounted with fluid grace that belied his size and knelt beside her. Up close, his features came into focus, strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble, sun-weathered skin, and eyes the color of a summer storm. "You're hurt," he said, gently moving her hand to inspect the wound. "What happened?" "Husband," Abigail managed to rasp, her voice barely audible, "shot me, left me to die." His expression darkened. "What's your name, madam?" Abigail Kingston." "York Keller," he replied. "Most folks call me York." He reached for his canteen and uncorked it. "Here, small sips now." Abigail's hands trembled too violently to hold the canteen, so York gently supported her head and helped her drink. The water, warm and slightly metallic, felt like heaven against her parched lips. "Thank you," she whispered between sips. "We need to get you to a doctor," York said, carefully examining her wound again. "Bullets still in there. How long you been out here?" "Since morning." Abigail winced as a fresh wave of pain washed over her. "Thomas, we were heading to Roswell. He found a map, said there was gold." York's face hardened. "Roswell's still a day's ride from here." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Night's coming. We need shelter." He stood and looked around. "I'll make camp, tend to that wound best I can. Come morning, we'll head for my place. It's closer than town." He settled her against his saddle, giving her more water before setting up a small camp. As darkness fell, he built a fire and prepared a simple meal of jerky and beans. "Why were you out here?" Abigail asked as he cleaned her wound with whiskey from his saddlebag. "Tracking," York replied. "I raise horses about half a day's ride east. Some wild Mustang's been moving through this area. Was hoping to add a few to my stock." He paused, his hands steady as he worked. "Never expected to find a lady instead." Abigail attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. "I'm sorry to interrupt your hunt." "Don't apologize," York said firmly. "No decent man leaves anyone to die in the desert, let alone their wife." He fashioned a bandage from a clean shirt. "What kind of man was this Thomas?" Abigail stared into the fire. "I thought I knew. We married in St. Louis, came west for opportunity. He was charming, ambitious." Her voice trailed off. "Until today, I never thought he could." She couldn't finish. "Some men change when gold's involved," York said quietly. "Seen it during the strikes in California. Turns good men bad and bad men worse." As he finished bandaging her wound, York offered her his bedroll. "You need rest. I'll keep watch." "You've given me your water, your food, and now your bed," Abigail murmured, exhaustion overtaking her. "Why help a stranger this way?" York settled against his saddle, rifle across his lap. Out here, madam, nobody survives alone. My pa taught me that. He tipped his hat lower over his eyes. Get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow. Despite the pain and the betrayal still fresh in her mind, Abigail found herself drifting off to the sound of coyotes in the distance and the quiet, reassuring presence of the stranger who had saved her life. Morning came with the harsh glare of the desert sun. Abigail woke to find York already up, brewing coffee over a small fire. The night had brought fever and she felt weaker than before. Morning, he said, noticing her stirring. How's the pain? Bearable, she lied, struggling to sit up. York brought her a tin cup of coffee. Fever's set in. We need to move before it gets worse. After a small breakfast of hardtack and jerky, York carefully helped Abigail onto his horse. I'll walk alongside, he said. It's not far. The journey was arduous. Each step the horse took sent waves of pain through Abigail's side. York kept a steady pace, leading the horse over the rough terrain, stopping occasionally to give her water. Tell me about your home, Abigail said during one such stop, desperate for distraction from the pain. Nothing fancy, York replied, adjusting her position to ease her discomfort. Cabin with a good-sized barn, 20 acres fenced for the horses. He paused. It's peaceful, no neighbors for miles, which suits me fine. You live alone, a shadow crossed his face. Since the war, lost my wife to fever while I was fighting. Came west after, couldn't bear to stay in Tennessee with the memories. I'm sorry, Abigail said softly. York nodded once, then helped her drink more water. We should keep moving. By mid-afternoon, a small homestead appeared on the horizon. A modest log cabin stood beside a large barn, surrounded by split-rail fencing. Several horses grazed in a nearby pasture. There it is, York said. Almost there. He led the horse to the cabin and gently lifted Abigail down. The movement made her cry out in pain, and he murmured an apology as he carried her inside. The cabin's interior was simple but neat: a main room with a stone fireplace, wooden table with chairs, and a few shelves lined with books. He carried her to a bedroom off the main room and laid her on a bed covered with a handmade quilt. Rest here, he said. I need to tend to my horse, then I'll see about that bullet. When York returned, he brought fresh water, clean cloths, and a wooden box. I've got some medical supplies, he explained. Learned a bit of doctoring during the war. He sat beside the bed. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Kingston. This will hurt. Abigail, she corrected weakly. After what you've done for me, I think formalities are past. York nodded. Abigail. He prepared a strip of leather. Bite down on this. The next hour was agony as York carefully extracted the bullet from her side. Abigail bit down on the leather, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't scream. When it was finally over, he stitched the wound with careful precision. You did well, he said, wiping the sweat from her brow with a cool cloth. Bullet's out, now we fight the infection. For the next 3 days, Abigail drifted in and out of consciousness as fever gripped her. York rarely left her side, changing bandages, spooning broth into her mouth when she was lucid, and placing cool compresses on her forehead. In her feverish state, she sometimes called for Thomas. Other times she cried for her parents, long dead. York spoke to her in a low, soothing voice, anchoring her to reality when nightmares threatened. On the 4th day, Abigail woke with a clear head. Sunlight streamed through the window beside the bed. She was wearing a man's shirt, much too large for her frame, and the bedding had been changed. Her wound still throbbed, but the burning heat of infection had subsided. You're back, York said from the doorway. He carried a tray with a steaming bowl and a cup. Hungry, Abigail nodded, suddenly aware of her hollow stomach. How long have I been here? 4 days, he replied, setting the tray on a small table and helping her sit up. Thought I might lose you the second night. Fever broke yesterday. You stayed with me the whole time, York shrugged, seemingly embarrassed. Had nowhere pressing to be. As she ate the rabbit stew he'd prepared, Abigail took in her surroundings more carefully. The room was Spartan but comfortable: a chest of drawers, a small table, and a rocking chair where York had clearly spent many hours watching over her. This is your room, she realized aloud. Don't worry about that, York said. I've been fine on a pallet by the fire. Thank you, Abigail said, meeting his eyes. You've saved my life twice now. Just doing what's right, he replied, though the slight coloring of his cheeks suggested her gratitude affected him more than he let on. When you're stronger, we'll ride into Roswell. Sheriff, there should know about your husband. The mention of Thomas brought reality crashing back. Abigail set down her spoon. I have nothing, she said quietly. No money, no clothes besides what I was wearing. He took everything. We'll figure that out when you're healed, York assured her. For now, just rest. Over the next week, Abigail's strength gradually returned. York provided her with some clothes he purchased from a traveling peddler, simple but serviceable dresses that were a bit large but could be belted at the waist. When she insisted on helping around the cabin, he reluctantly agreed to let her prepare meals while he tended to the horses and property. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, York finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. What will you do after we report what happened? Abigail had been pondering the same question. I'm not sure, she admitted. I have family back east, but… She sighed. The shame of returning, failed and abandoned, is almost worse than starting over with nothing. York nodded, understanding. What did you do? Before marriage, I mean. I was a schoolteacher, she replied. In St. Louis, I loved it, actually. Thomas convinced me to leave it behind. She smiled ruefully. Another mistake in a long list. Roswell could use a teacher, York said carefully. Town's growing, lots of families moving in. Perhaps. Abigail watched a hawk circling in the distance. First, I need to face what happened. I need to look the sheriff in the eye and admit I married a man capable of murder. Attempted murder, York corrected, and none of it your fault. The following day they rode to Roswell together, Abigail sitting behind York on his horse, her arms tentatively encircling his waist. The town had grown since she and Thomas had passed through months earlier on their way to the supposed gold site. New buildings lined the main street, and a proper schoolhouse stood near the church. At the sheriff's office, Abigail recounted what had happened. Sheriff Willis, a weathered man with kind eyes, took her statement with appropriate gravity. I'm mighty sorry, Mrs. Kingston, he said. We'll put out bulletins for Thomas Kingston. Most likely he's headed for the Arizona Territory or California. What are the chances you'll find him? Abigail asked. The sheriff exchanged a glance with York. Truth be told, madam, not great. Territory's vast and men can disappear easy out here, but we'll try. After filing the report, York guided Abigail to the general store where he insisted on purchasing her necessities: a valise, undergarments, a nightgown, and toiletries. I can't accept all this, she protested. Consider it a loan, he said. You can repay me when you're settled. They stopped at the town's small hotel. You should stay here, York said. Proper place for a lady. Abigail glanced at the hotel, then back at York. I'd rather return to your homestead if that's acceptable, just until I find employment. Relief flashed across York's face, though he quickly masked it. Of course. My home's yours for as long as you need. As they rode back, Abigail found herself noticing things she'd been too ill to appreciate before: the way York handled his horse with gentle confidence, how his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. That evening, as they sat before the fire, York broke their comfortable silence. I spoke with Mrs. Holloway at the general store. She says the town council's been looking for a teacher. School term starts in a month. Abigail looked up from her mending. You inquired for me. Hope that wasn't overstepping, York said, suddenly uncertain. No, she replied warmly. It was thoughtful, thank you. As days turned into weeks, Abigail found a rhythm at York's homestead. She tended the cabin while he worked with his horses, prepared meals they shared at the rough-hewn table, and in the evenings, they often read by lamplight York from his collection of history books, Abigail from borrowed novels. She discovered his quiet passion for breeding and training quality horses, his self-taught knowledge of literature, and his dry sense of humor that emerged once he grew comfortable with her presence. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of teaching, and gradually, the painful details of her marriage to Thomas. He was charming at first, she explained one evening as they sat on the porch. Attentive, ambitious. My parents had died. I was teaching and living with another teacher's family. Thomas offered stability, adventure. She sighed. I mistook his controlling nature for protection. By the time I recognized it for what it was, we were already heading west. York listened without judgment. Some wounds don't show on the outside, he said simply. 3 weeks after her arrival, Abigail interviewed with the Roswell Town Council and was offered the teaching position. The school would provide a small room behind the classroom where she could live humble accommodations, but her own. I can move to town next week, she told York over supper that evening. The councils agreed to advance me enough for basic furnishings. York nodded, his expression unreadable. That's good news. Yes, she agreed, though her enthusiasm felt hollow. I'll finally stop imposing on your hospitality. You've been no imposition, York said quickly. In fact, he hesitated, then pushed his plate away. The cabins felt more like a home with you here. The admission hung in the air between them. Abigail felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing wound. I've been happy here, she confessed. Happier than I expected to be again after what happened. York met her eyes. You could stay, he said quietly. If you wanted, teach in town but live here. The ride's not too far. People would talk, Abigail pointed out. Let them, he replied. Unless, he looked away, unless you're eager to start fresh, away from reminders. Abigail reached across the table and placed her hand over his. You're not a reminder of anything I wish to forget, York. His fingers curled around hers, calloused but gentle. I haven't felt this way since Rebecca died, he admitted. Didn't think I would again. I'm still legally married, Abigail reminded him, though she didn't withdraw her hand. I know, York sighed, and I respect that, but I also know what I feel. That night, Abigail lay awake in York's bed, thinking about the life she'd almost lost and the unexpected one she'd found instead. Thomas had tried to kill her for gold, yet that terrible act had led her to a man who'd given her his water when she was dying, his home when she was homeless. And now, it seemed, his heart when hers was still healing. The next day, Sheriff Willis rode out to the homestead with news. Thomas Kingston had been found dead in an El Paso saloon, shot during a card game gone wrong. He'd been carrying a significant amount of gold dust, likely what he'd discovered and abandoned Abigail to claim for himself. The money's legally yours, Mrs. Kingston, the sheriff explained. Once the El Paso authorities release it, might take some time, but as his widow, it'll come to you. After the sheriff left, Abigail sat on the porch steps, emotions warring within her. Relief, anger, grief, and a strange sense of closure swirled together. York sat beside her, not speaking, simply offering his presence. I should feel something more, Abigail finally said. Sadness or justice or something, but I just feel empty. That's natural, York replied. No matter what he did, you shared a life with him. A life built on lies, she said bitterly. I never really knew him at all. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the desert in gold and crimson. Finally, Abigail took a deep breath. I'm free, she whispered. York turned to her. Yes. I don't have to move to town, she continued. Not if I don't want to. No, he agreed. You don't. Abigail looked at him, this quiet, honorable man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. I'd like to stay, she said softly, but not as your guest. York's eyes searched hers. What are you saying, Abigail? I'm saying I've found something here I never expected, something true. She placed her hand over his heart. I'm saying I think we could build something good together if you wanted that too. York covered her hand with his own. I do, he said simply. More than anything. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Abigail closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, a question and an answer both. When they separated, York rested his forehead against hers. Take your teaching position, he said. Build your independence. I'll wait however long you need. I don't need a long courtship, Abigail replied. I've learned that time doesn't guarantee you know someone's character. Actions do, and yours have shown me everything I need to know. That fall, Abigail began teaching at the Roswell schoolhouse. Each morning, York would ride her to town, and each afternoon he would be waiting to bring her home to their home. The townspeople gossiped at first, but the sight of the serious horse breeder and the new schoolteacher riding together, her arms around his waist, soon became a familiar one. In November, when the desert nights turned cold, they married in a simple ceremony at the town church. Abigail wore a cream-colored dress purchased with some of the money that had finally arrived from El Paso, Thomas's blood money, transformed into a symbol of her new beginning. "Never thought I'd be wearing white at my second wedding," she whispered to York as they stood before the minister. "You could wear sackcloth and still be the most beautiful woman in the territory," he replied, making her blush. The reception was held at their homestead, with neighbors and townspeople filling the yard. As the celebration wound down and guests departed, York took Abigail's hand and led her to the barn. "I have something to show you," he said, a rare excitement in his voice. Inside, he guided her to a stall where a sleek Palomino mare watched them with intelligent eyes. "She's yours," York said. "Broke her myself, gentle but spirited, reminded me of you." Abigail entered the stall slowly, reaching out to stroke the mare's gleaming neck. "She's beautiful," she breathed. "Does she have a name?" "Thought you should name her." Abigail considered the mare, who nuzzled her palm affectionately. "Phoenix," she decided, because she represents rising from the ashes of what was into something new and beautiful. York's arms encircled her from behind, and he pressed a kiss to her temple. Perfect name. That night, as husband and wife, they came together with a tenderness that healed the final wounds Thomas had inflicted. In York's embrace, Abigail found not the controlling passion that had masked Thomas's true nature, but a partnership of equals, passionate and respectful both. "I never thought I'd trust again," she confessed in the darkness. York's fingers traced the scar on her side, the physical reminder of betrayal. "Trust is earned," he said. "I'll spend my life earning yours." "You already have it," she assured him, drawing his face to hers for another kiss. Spring brought new life to the desert and to their homestead. The horse breeding business flourished under their combined efforts, York's skill with the animals and Abigail's head for figures and correspondence with potential buyers. The school term was ending, and Abigail had been asked to continue in the fall with an increased salary. One evening, as they rode the boundaries of their property, York pointed to a ridge overlooking a small creek that ran through their land. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly. "The cabins served me well enough as a bachelor, but," he glanced at her, "perhaps we could build something new, something that's ours from the beginning." Abigail followed his gaze to the ridge. "A house with a view," she mused, "with a proper parlor for entertaining." "And more bedrooms," York added, looking at her meaningfully. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. They'd spoken of children, a topic she'd approached cautiously. With Thomas, pregnancy had never occurred, and she'd secretly feared the fault lay with her. Those fears she'd confided to York one night, and he'd held her close, assuring her that whatever came, they would face it together. "More bedrooms would be wise," she agreed with a smile. "How many did you have in mind?" "As many as we need," he replied, reaching across to take her hand. "But there's something else I should tell you first." A flicker of worry crossed Abigail's face. "What is it?" "I received a letter yesterday," York explained, "from a lawyer in Tennessee. My brother died last winter, influenza. He left his children. You have a brother." Abigail interrupted, surprised by this new information. York nodded. We weren't close after the war. He fought for the Confederacy, I for the Union, never reconciled properly." Regret shadowed his features. "But his will names me guardian to his kids, 3 of them ages 10, 8, and 6. They're with a neighbor now, but—" Abigail squeezed his hand. "Of course they must come here," she said without hesitation. "Their family." Relief flooded York's face. "You're sure? It's a lot to ask, taking on 3 children at once." "Those children have lost everything," Abigail said softly. "How could I deny them a home when I know exactly how that feels? Besides," she added with a small smile, "it seems I'll get to be a mother sooner than expected." York dismounted and helped her down from her horse, then embraced her tightly. "You're an extraordinary woman, Abigail Keller." "I'm a fortunate one," she corrected. "Now, let's go home and start planning. We have a house to build and children to prepare for." The following month brought a flurry of activity. Construction began on the new house, a sturdy two-story home with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Abigail threw herself into preparations, converting York's study into a bedroom for the boys and the storage room into one for the girl. In July, York traveled to St. Louis to meet the children and bring them home. The week of his absence was the longest they'd been apart since their marriage, and Abigail found herself counting the hours until their return. When the wagon finally appeared on the horizon, she stood on the porch, heart pounding. York drove, with three small figures seated beside and behind him. As they drew closer, Abigail could make out their features: two dark-haired boys and a girl with blonde curls. York reined the horses to a stop, and for a moment, the children simply stared at Abigail, uncertainty in their young faces. Then York said something quiet to them, and they climbed down from the wagon. "Children," York said, "this is your Aunt Abigail." "Abigail, these are the Kellers, James, William, and Emma." Abigail knelt to their level, smiling gently. "I'm so happy to meet you," she said. "Your Uncle York has told me so much about you." Emma, the youngest, stepped forward first. "Do you have cookies?" she asked seriously. Abigail laughed. "As a matter of fact, I do. Would you like to come inside and have some?" The little girl nodded solemnly and slipped her small hand into Abigail's. The boys followed, still cautious but unable to resist the mention of cookies. As the children settled around the table with milk and cookies, York pulled Abigail aside. "They've been through a lot," he murmured. "Been passed between neighbors since Daniel died. Emma barely remembers her mother. She died when Emma was 3. "They're safe now," Abigail assured him. "We'll give them time." The adjustment wasn't easy. James, the eldest, was defensive and occasionally hostile, protecting his siblings from what he perceived as yet another temporary home. William was withdrawn, speaking rarely and watching everything with wary eyes. Only Emma seemed able to adapt, following Abigail around the cabin and asking endless questions. One night, after a particularly difficult day when James had run off to the barn after an argument, Abigail found York sitting on the porch steps, head in his hands. "I'm failing them," he said as she sat beside him. "Daniel's children deserve better than what I can give." "You're not failing," Abigail corrected. "They're grieving and scared. Trust takes time." She took his hand. "Remember how long it took me to fully trust again?" York squeezed her hand. "You're better with them than I am." "Different, not better," she replied. "James looks up to you even when he's angry. I see how he watches you with the horses." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "They need both of us in different ways." Gradually, as summer gave way to fall, routines developed. The boys began helping York with chores around the homestead, learning to care for the horses and repair fencing. Emma attached herself to Abigail, helping with cooking and insisting on accompanying her to school each day. The new house was completed in October, a spacious home with separate bedrooms for each child, a proper kitchen for Abigail, and a study where York could manage the business. Moving day became a celebration, with neighbors helping transport furniture and bringing housewarming gifts. That night, after the children were asleep in their new rooms, Abigail and York stood on the porch, looking out at the moonlit desert. "Did you ever imagine this?" Abigail asked. "When you found me dying in the desert, did you picture any of this?" York shook his head. "Never. I just saw someone who needed help." He turned to face her. "Though I won't pretend I wasn't struck by you even then, strength like yours in the face of such betrayal, it's rare." "As is kindness like yours," she countered, "giving water to a stranger when it's your most precious resource." "Best decision I ever made," York said, drawing her into his arms. "Look what came of it." As they stood together, the sounds of their home surrounded them: the creak of new timbers settling, the soft breathing of children sleeping peacefully, the distant nickering of horses in the barn. "I have something to tell you," Abigail said, looking up at her husband. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks now." York raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Abigail took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We'll need that 4th bedroom sooner than expected." Joy bloomed across York's face. "You're sure?" She nodded, her own eyes shining. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. Late spring, he thinks." York lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, mindful of her condition. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, "more than I have words to express." "You don't need words," Abigail replied. "You've shown me every day since you found me." In April of 1880, Abigail gave birth to a son they named Daniel, after York's brother. The children, now firmly settled as Kellers, took their roles as older siblings seriously. James proudly announced that he would teach Daniel to ride when he was old enough. William, who had gradually emerged from his shell, made a small wooden horse as a gift. Emma insisted on helping with the baby at every opportunity, though her help often created more work for Abigail. The homestead continued to flourish. York's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and Abigail's school became known for its quality education, attracting students from outlying ranches who boarded in town during the week. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, the children chattering about their day, baby Daniel cooing in his cradle nearby, Abigail caught York watching her with a tender expression. "What?" she asked with a smile. "Just thinking about water," he replied cryptically. Later, when the children were asleep and they sat together on the porch, she asked him to explain. "In the desert," York said, "water means life. When I found you, I gave you the last of mine without a second thought." He took her hand, tracing the lines of her palm. "I didn't know then that you'd become my oasis, the place where I found life again after wandering through my own desert for so long." Abigail leaned against him. "We saved each other," she said simply. In the years that followed, their family grew again with the birth of twin girls, Catherine and Margaret, in 1882. The homestead expanded as well, more acres added, more horses bred and trained, a reputation that drew buyers from as far as California and Texas. James, at 16, showed such aptitude with horses that York made him a full partner in training the yearlings. William discovered a talent for carpentry and began an apprenticeship with the town's cabinet maker. Emma, following in Abigail's footsteps, declared her intention to become a teacher. On the 10th anniversary of the day York found Abigail in the desert, they rode together to the spot, or as near as they could determine. The desert had changed, as deserts do, shifting and rearranging itself with wind and time. "It was somewhere around here," York said, dismounting from his horse. "I remember that rock formation." Abigail joined him on the ground, looking around at the harsh landscape that had nearly claimed her life. "Strange to think how close I came to dying here," she mused. "One more hour in the sun, or if you'd taken a different route." "But I didn't," York said, taking her hand. "And here we are." From their saddlebags, they produced a small sapling, a desert willow that might, with care and luck, survive in this unforgiving place. "The children thought we were mad when we told them what we planned," Abigail laughed as they dug a hole in the hard ground. "They might be right," York admitted, wiping sweat from his brow. "This tree has almost no chance." "Like a woman shot and abandoned in the desert," Abigail pointed out. "Sometimes the most unlikely things not only survive but thrive." They planted the sapling and watered it generously from their canteens, a symbolic giving back to the desert that had, in its harsh way, brought them together. "We'll check on it whenever we pass this way," York said as they mounted their horses, "though I don't expect it to last the season." Abigail smiled. "Have a little faith, Mr. Keller. Miracles happen in the desert. We're living proof." As they rode home side by side, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a desperate, dying woman to the matriarch of a thriving family and homestead. Thomas had shot her and left her for dead, believing gold more valuable than the vows they'd shared. In doing so, he'd unwittingly led her to a man who understood the true value of things. Water freely given, trust slowly earned, and love steadfastly maintained through all of life's seasons. "What are you thinking about?" York asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "How endings and beginnings are often the same moment," she replied, "and how grateful I am that you found me at both." The New Mexico sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert as they rode toward home, toward the life they'd built together from the most unlikely of beginnings. A desperate woman, a compassionate stranger, and the water that saved her life. 5 years later, on a journey back from Santa Fe, York and Abigail passed by the site where they'd planted the sapling. To their amazement, the desert willow had survived and grown, its delicate pink blossoms a stark contrast to the harsh landscape surrounding it. "Well, I'll be damned," York murmured, reining his horse to a stop. Abigail smiled as they dismounted to inspect the tree. "I told you to have faith." They stood beside the willow, now nearly 6 feet tall, its roots somehow finding moisture deep beneath the desert floor. "It's like us," Abigail said, touching one of the blossoms gently, "stronger than it looks and determined to thrive where it was planted." York slipped an arm around her waist. "Reminds me more of you," he countered, "beautiful and resilient." As they continued their journey home, Abigail thought about how far they'd come from that fateful day. James, now 21, ran much of the horse breeding operation, allowing York more time to expand their ranch. William had opened his own furniture shop in town, crafting pieces that were sought after throughout the territory. Emma was completing her education in Santa Fe, preparing to return to Roswell as a qualified teacher. Their younger children, Daniel, now 11, and the 8-year-old twins were growing up in a home filled with love and security. The desert had taught Abigail its most valuable lesson, that life, like water, was precious and not to be wasted. Thomas had valued gold above all else and died violently in a saloon far from home. York had valued compassion and built a legacy that would outlive them both. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter, Abigail took York's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. York raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For your water," she replied. "All those years ago." "It was the first truly selfless act anyone had done for me in a very long time." York brought her hand to his lips. "Best decision I ever made," he said, echoing words he'd spoken many times over the years. "Look what came of it." And as the stars began to appear in the vast New Mexico sky, Abigail Keller looked at what had indeed come of that moment: a family, a home, a life rich beyond any gold Thomas had ever sought, and knew that sometimes salvation comes in the form of water freely given by a stranger who becomes, in time, the keeper of your heart.